moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. And I feel that this serves to both the purposes of reconciliation and healing, but also in acknowledging that we have much to learn from and be inspired by Native American cultures in the ways that they respected and all life and lived in harmony with nature. So what are beneficials? Well,
excuse me, John, your screen is not being shared.
Not being shared?
No.
Oh, goodness. Well, now.
This is Mary Catherine. I can see John.
Okay, I need to share my screen. Here we go. How's this? Got it? Okay. So here's that slide I was referring to about taking a moment to find your location on the map and honoring those whose land we now occupy. And the next slide being question, what are beneficials? And the answer is, customarily, we refer to beneficials as those organisms that, let's see, I'm trying to, those organisms that help gardeners and farmers, which include pollen and parasites. So pollinators ensure genetic diversity, carrying pollen from one individual to the flower of a different individual in a species. So it's in flowers' interests not to self-pollinate, and of course not to receive pollen from the wrong kind of flower. And you'll see the list of a variety of pollinators. Some are much more effective than others. Ants might even have a negative effect in terms of just using nectar but never pollinating. But 80% of all plants need pollinators to set seed. So they're tremendously important in keeping, not only keeping the ecosystem going, but look at this effect with open pollination. When the pollinators are doing their job, you have a nice ripe strawberry. When the strawberry has to resort to pollinating itself, that's what you see in the middle. And the wind might blow a little bit of pollen onto it. That's what you see on the right-hand side. That's how important pollinators are for the food that we eat. 1/3 of our food is pollinated. Now, I mentioned predators and parasites. Well, these are the pests that those organisms control. This is the rogues gallery here. And it's called integrated pest management. You could also call it intelligent pest management, because we're trying to avoid toxic chemicals in the environment. One way is floating row covers as a kind of a barrier, planting companion plants that will repel those insects, hand picking, just picking them off your plants, or using organic pesticides if you must, and if they're safe, if you're sure that they'll work in ways that are not harmful. So we have vertebrate predators, hummingbirds, songbirds, and other birds, and we also have bats controlling the pest populations. And they're in invertebrates, the spiders and praying mantises, for example, are generalists. They'll eat just about anything. But then the syrphid fly, assassin bug, gall midge, firefly, ladybug, and pirate bug, those are examples of the real heroes in terms of really focusing their efforts on eating the pests like the aphids and such. Parasites also will focus their efforts on things like aphids and caterpillars that might be harmful to the crops that we're growing. But let's think about invisible organisms, what's growing in the soil. In a teaspoon of soil, there are just uncountable numbers of these bacteria, actinomycetes, fungi, algae, protozoa, nematodes, and also they're the little guys who are living in the leaf litter and in the upper layers of soil that are doing their job to keep things moving, recycling nutrients, feeding each other. We have a real problem here because I guess many humans are used to thinking of getting rid of bugs, and unfortunately we're being quite efficient at doing just that. Studies have shown that as many as 75% of the total insect population has been, we have decreased by that amount. In other words, we only have, in some cases, 25% of what we used to have, and that's That's by my own observation. There are just a lot fewer butterflies, for example, than there used to be. A world without insects, according to David Wagner, is a world that has no flowers, silent forests, a world of dung and old leaves and rotting carcasses because they're not decomposing things. Collapse and decay, erosion, loss that would spread through ecosystems, spiraling from predators to plants. Here you see all vertebrates have been affected. We're not just talking numbers here, we're talking diversity, the numbers of species that are endangered. And we really don't know exactly how each of these species is important to each other, but we do know from experience that they're more important than many people realize. And they're important to us too. All of nature is important to us. Nature therapy or forest bathing is something that Japanese doctors will prescribe. If you are suffering from anxiety or stress or depression, and there are dozens of certified forests in Japan that you can visit on a regular basis, and it's been documented that it really is good for our health to be in nature and just to spend some time there undistracted. So it's good for our souls as well. The benefits of birds then include pest control, seed dispersal, and carrion cleanup, crows and turkey vultures. Birds inspire us. These paintings of J.F. Lansdowne are examples. Poets and singers, all artists are just go to birds because they're and they fly after all. Bird populations have declined by 30% since 1970. 2/3 of North America's birds could be gone by 2100 if the current trends continue. Rachel Carson in 1962 wrote the book Silent Spring, alerting us to the indiscriminate use of pesticides, including especially DDT. And while we have limited our use of DDT now, there are still others that in some ways are much worse. And pesticides are now killing many birds every year. Neonicotinoids are especially harmful as a systemic pesticide being used by farmers and in some cases by gardeners. They should be outlawed, as the European Union has done. They are incredibly harmful to all of nature. Window collisions kill many, many birds in the US every year. Birds see windows as a continuation of the out of doors. So naturally they're not inhibited just to fly right into them. Here are some ways that you can make your windows visible to birds. You can go to abcbirds.org for some details about that. Cats kill many birds, and that's a huge number there. It's a significant cause of bird mortality. So we should keep our cats indoors, and that might protect your cat as well, because there are predators out there, wild animals that will make a meal of a cat if possible, and other cats and dogs that are roaming loose might also do some harm to your cat. So, and then there's habitat loss. Industrial agriculture, residential and commercial development have all just have had tremendous impacts on the amount of habitat available for birds to live in. And then climate change as well. It affects all organisms as it does us. So what do birds need? They need food, water, shelter, and a place to rear their young, just like any other organism. But we should not feed them with what is really junk food here, heavily processed baked goods that contain things that are not good for birds and don't contain enough of things that are important, such as protein and fat. And this is the result, a consequence of a bird that's eaten too much baked goods, this angel wing deformity. So approved for foods for songbirds include apples, bananas, pasta and rice, eggshells, hard cheese, peas, corn, oats, chopped lettuce, melon, pumpkin, and squash seeds, peanut butter, raisins, and nuts. I've been enjoying feeding the birds squash seeds and black walnuts, and it's fun sometimes to experiment and to see what birds will eat and what they prefer. And of course, bird seed. You can make your own homemade bird feeder. You can purchase one. If you have an open one like this, you're going to have to monitor it regularly because it will become soiled by bird droppings. There's also this kind of bird feeder, and you're bound to want to prevent squirrels from gaining access, because they will if it's at all possible. Here's a a nice solution, putting it right on your window, because if the squirrels can't view it, can't reach it there, you can view the birds right up close. You can monitor it for how clean it is. This would be my preferred kind of bird feeder if I had that option. A homemade suet recipe can really can be done with just 2 ingredients. The suet or shortening and the ground cornmeal would be sufficient. But if you want to mix some peanut butter in with that, that's fine. And you bring these 2 ingredients to heat them up and stir them until they're melted. And then you add the other dry ingredients and let them and freeze them. The whole freeze it in an ice cube tray, for example, so that it'll be able to fit, or whatever mold you want to have that will fit inside that suet feeder. And suet will turn rancid above 50 degrees, so you shouldn't leave it out in hot weather. You can also feed your birds water, or offer them water to drink with a homemade feeder or something that you purchase. And bird baths don't have to be expensive either. Heated bird baths are much appreciated. You can buy a heater in various places that birds will do have the need to drink in the winter as well. Now, if you're wanting to make your own bird box, visit all-birds.com, as you see at the bottom there. And they have plans for these 8 birds and more. And they'll specify the dimensions that are appropriate for each bird: the box floor, box height, the entrance height, the entrance diameter, and the placement height, how far ground level it should be placed. Here are 2 non-native birds that have been quite invasive and quite harmful to our native birds, starlings and house sparrows. They are not protected. In other words, you can go ahead and harass them or trap them and do what you please with them, because they will be quite vicious at times with not only excluding but destroying eggs and chicks. Now here's a design for a bluebird box that I think is an excellent one, and notice that it has that metal baffle on top. Otherwise, that box will eventually decay from being soaked with water, but that covering protects it and keeps it dry enough so that it really has a lifetime guarantee. And it's also good to have one side that is easily opened for inspection and for cleaning. So here are some things that you should not do. No colored bird boxes, because that bright colors attracts predators' attention. Likewise, the perch that sometimes people put on bird boxes is totally unnecessary for the birds. They fly right to the circle there, the hole. But an animal that's trying to gain access to that hole might be able to use that perch. So, and here are a couple other things that are advised against. The entire bird box should be made of wood. In this case, the ceramic is the base, and it should not be free swinging in the wind like this. So you'll want to protect your birdhouse from squirrels, because they will, if given a chance, chew that opening wider and just move right in. And here are some ways to protect birdhouses, not only from squirrels, but also from predators. And I like this, the cage on the upper right is a good way to exclude predators. Clean birdhouses at the end of the summer with a 9-to-1 solution of water and bleach. Leave them in place over the winter so birds can use them for shelter. In fact, you can make a winter roosting box for that purpose. So animal protein, fruit, and seeds are in birds' diets, and a lot of other things too: flower buds, flowers, leaf buds, new leaves, grass shoots. The list goes on. Certainly nuts. Caterpillars are essential baby food for chicks. A chickadee, a mother, will require 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to feed her chicks and raise them and fledge them. It's such an ideal baby food because it's soft, easily digestible, and has all the right nutrients that those chicks need to mature. Now, here we have Doug Tallamy, an author of a couple of different books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, and he informs us as a scientist who knows what he's talking about. He's done the research. Caterpillars do prefer and even require native plants, native trees and shrubs especially. That's their food. They can't eat the leaves of non-native trees and shrubs because they haven't had time yet in terms of in evolutionary scale to figure out biochemically how to digest them. They haven't broken down the defenses. But they have been around the native plants long enough to figure out how to eat at least some of them. So here is a starter list: best trees, vines, and shrubs to plant for birds. And an oak tree, because it's a native tree and because it hosts so many different caterpillars, that's a #1 tree on the list. Mulberries are delicious fruit for birds. This is a delicious fruit for humans too, for that matter. Sassafras fruits, quite popular. So is elderberry, another eminently edible and medicinal plant for that, berry for that matter. Elderberry syrup is great for warding off a flu. Any of the viburnums, and they're such beautiful plants. So why be satisfied with the non-native ornamental when you can plant a native ornamental that's just as beautiful? Gray dogwood, sometimes these shrubs are stripped of berries by migrating birds not in August and September. Look at this beautiful, so all of the dogwoods, red osier dogwood, beautiful in all 4 seasons, white dogwood as well. I want to go back to that slide. Get 10 free trees at arborday.org. They will be small saplings, but you can't beat the price, and all you have to do is make, and they will send you those 10 white dogwoods or a number of other trees that are offered. You can make your selection. Spice bush, the fruit has 50% fat. Wonderful, very essential nutrient way to get for birds to get energy. Staghorn sumac has fruit that persists into the winter. They love blueberries, high bush or low bush. Here's a winterberry holly that's spectacularly ornamental and providing fruit in the middle of winter. You need a male flower to pollinate the female, or male plant that has male flowers, so that the pollen from that plant can be transferred by pollinators to the stigmas of the female flowers. Likewise, this holly that we're familiar with the sharp needle-edged leaves is one where you need a male plant to pollinate the female. Juneberries are an absolutely beautiful and wonderfully delicious berry. This is a native tree. Not many people are familiar with it, but there's no wonder that birds love this fruit, because it, in my opinion, it tastes just as good as blueberries, and it's just a sensational selection in your landscape. Hawthorn, also beautiful tree and quite nutritious for birds. Crabapple, black cherry, and chokecherry, very popular. Aronia, black choke berry, as distinct from choke cherry, and also seldom used. It's used as an ornamental, which is fine because it is native, but why not share those fruit? Why not take your share of the fruits, because they are actually quite delicious and nutritious and even medicinal. MissouriBotanicalGarden.org is a source. If you do a search for any plant, such as black chokeberry, for example, or using the Latin name and the word, the name Missouri, that's enough. It'll bring up Missouri Botanical Garden on the web, and you'll learn all of this basic information about the plant and more besides, a couple of paragraphs of information. So it's a good resource when you're researching plants. Missouri Botanical Garden. Here's another chokeberry, or Aronia arbutifolia. Blackberries, black raspberries. Northern bayberry is attractive to birds. It has fruits that last into the late winter, so might be the last source of, it'll be available when virtually nothing else is. And then the evergreens have seeds at times, and they offer shelter, places for birds to have their nests, and they are also hosts to a number of different insects, which are food for the birds. Edible fruit on the eastern red cedar. Now, if you've selected your tree, you want to dig an extra wide hole, no deeper than necessary. But you know, twice as wide as you might think is necessary. Keep the topsoil and the subsoil in separate piles when you're digging it out, so that when you place that plant in, you can return the subsoil first and then the topsoil on top where they belong. Resist the urge to put in compost or fertilizer or something like that, because you want those roots to keep growing outwards. They don't grow down as nearly as much as they grow out. And that's where they're searching for nutrients. And if they're getting all the nutrients they need right in that hole, well, they won't be so motivated to keep on growing laterally, which they need to do for their overall health. Surround the tree with mulch, the sapling, and to create a little rim to hold water. And the mulch can go out as much as far as the drip line even, or farther if you like. The mulch should not be too coarse. It shouldn't be too deep. It should be no more than maybe 3 or 4 inches, and certainly not against the trunk, which you'll see this volcano mulch is bad for the tree's health. On with the list here. Virginia creeper. These berries are toxic to humans, but birds love them. And they also love fox grape and riverbank grape. Here's a list of birds that feed on wild grape. And down below, you'll see IllinoisWildflowers.info, which has faunal associations with all of the different plants that you might be interested in. It lists the birds and other animals that include that plant in its diet. Limber honeysuckle berries are edible, especially for mockingbird and catbird. Bearberry is a beautiful ground cover with birds that attract berries that attract birds. It's in the heath family. You can see those flowers remind you pollinated by native bees. Sunflower has seeds that will certainly bring the birds in, but so do black-eyed Susans, so do purple coneflowers, and in fact, all these plants, and if you're botanically inclined, you'll recognize that every one of these except sedum in the middle is a member of the aster family, just as the 3 previous slides showed flowers that are also members of the aster family, Asteraceae. Leave those seed stalks standing over the winter so that some of this food will remain in place and available to birds, and also so that some insects can overwinter in them. Some insects take up residence in standing stalks. Leave the leaves as well, and if you can just maybe rake them under a shrub or other places instead of hauling them off and you know, trying to rid your property of them, because they too are a haven for wildlife and for the little critters that will become food for the birds. Dead trees and snags also offer habitat for those insects that will part of the bird's diet, and they can also move in and raise their brood there. Create brush piles for a lot of wildlife, not just birds. And where is the habitat here? Well, perhaps the tree is native, but the rest of it sure isn't. And it's just so barren, really, of anything habitat to offer birds and other wildlife. And the lawn, in particular, is a obsession that began back in a few centuries ago as a kind of a status symbol, showing everyone that you don't need to use your land to grow crops. You're rich enough to just display it as almost like an extension of your indoors, a perfect carpet. But these perfect carpets are food deserts. They are polluters, because if you want a perfect carpet, you're bound to be treating it with all kinds of things. Resource guzzler for that reason as well. And so this is just unacceptable going into the future. We really need to do things very differently. Consuming so much of our water, we spend a lot of money on it. How's this for an alternative? If you're just a little bit relaxed about your lawn mowing, in other words, leave your lawn unmowed for a couple of weeks at least, and mowing no closer than 3 to 4 inches, you'll have yourself a wildflower lawn. Those are not weeds; those are pollinator plants, and I think you'll be glad you did when you start to see those butterflies and other organisms come in. You can call it a bee and butterfly lawn. You can call it a lazy lawnmower lawn. You can call it a freedom lawn. Environmental organizations are asking us to reduce our lawns by 25%, which I think is a reasonable goal. And I think you'll also be delighted with the overall effect when you do it. Now, there are some myths that need to be answered, some hesitations or barriers to acceptance of this kind of natural landscaping. They include concerns such as fire, which is an unnecessary concern. Won't happen. Vermin, there's natural land does not sustain rats. How about ticks? Well, that's a legitimate concern, certainly. You can create setbacks or paths for walking so that people won't even be making contact inadvertently with the plants, which is where the ticks are able to gain access if you brush against a plant, and that's where they're waiting to hitch a ride. You can visit LymeDisease.org for more information about keeping ticks at bay in your landscape. And if you want to use repellent, here are some products that work, or here's some ingredients that work. And you can also spray your clothing with permethrin, very effective. It actually kills ticks and mosquitoes and other bothersome insects on contact. Factory treated clothing is even better, lasts through 70 washings. How about the concern about mosquitoes? Well, natural landscapes don't have long-standing puddles, and if you do have a water feature, if you have a pond, consider koi or goldfish or mosquito fish as natural controls. And you can also use the bacteria called BTI. They're called mosquito dunks or mosquito bits. A solar activated pump will also do the trick because mosquito larvae require moving water. How about allergenic pollen? Is that a concern? Well, it's a concern if you have weeds and other non-native plants and grasses, but they're the ones that are the culprits. So, for example, ragweed, public enemy number one in terms of the impact that they on those who are suffering from allergies, and also these non-native grasses. But it's not the wildflowers, not goldenrod, for example. How about the property values? Well, actually, I think you can expect that your property value will increase once you have a beautiful landscape like this. A single tree, for example, will add thousands of dollars to the value of your property, and that's been demonstrated by actual surveys. Native fruits are much more nutritious and vastly preferred by birds that are passing through on their migration. And boy, is it important for them to get the energy that they need. Sometimes birds are really significantly underweight because they're just not finding the food that they need to power them for these long distance migrations. Even when these fruits, invasive fruits, are available, such as Japanese barberry, oriental bittersweet, and multiflora rose, these migrating birds will ignore them in preference to the other fruits. Here are some other invasive plants which you need to control in order and eradicate if possible before you even begin, hopefully, your project, your natural landscaping project. Garlic mustard, black swallowwort, Japanese knotweed, oriental bittersweet, and autumn olive are all invasive, as are bush honeysuckle, barberry, goutweed, common and glossy buckthorn, multiflora rose, burning bush, sycamore maple, and Norway maple are all non-natives, and you definitely should not plant them, and consider either limiting their or eliminating them on your property. Poison ivy is actually a native plant and has its place in the woods. Birds will feed on those fruits in the wintertime, but you certainly have every right to control it on your property where people will be circulating. And sheet mulching is a way to eliminate whatever's growing, whether it's an infestation of poison ivy, whether it's the lawn, whether it's a patch of weeds. If you decided that you want to have something beautiful and functional for as a wildflower and as a wildlife sanctuary, it's a great it's easy to do, for one thing, relatively easy. You don't have it's a no-dig approach. If you use newspaper for smothering, 6 thicknesses is advisable, or just 1 thickness of cardboard is adequate, and have them overlap. You can also buy this product called Ramboard. When you just roll out the cardboard, it covers large areas. And then it's called sheet mulching because you add mulch. If you're gardening for vegetables, for example, you might want to put some compost in there, or compostable materials as well as the mulch. But otherwise, it's surprising how little fertility you need for a wildflower garden. Actually, the more fertility, sometimes you're inviting the weeds because they need that fertility, but wildflowers can handle less fertile soil just fine. Suppressing the weeds is one role of benefits of mulch, is on keeping the soil moist and cool and enriching the soil eventually as it decomposes. Here are some types of mulch that you can use for your annual beds: grass clippings, straw, shredded leaves, pine straw, or pine needles. Contrary to what you might have heard about pine needles, they do not make the soil acidic, and you can confirm that online if you like. So shredded leaves and pine straw are also useful in perennial beds, as are pine bark, sawdust, wood chips, and chipped branch wood from a chipper. As is demonstrated here, you're not chipping logs, you're chipping branches of no more than 3 inches in diameter. That's a balanced diet for the soil organisms of nitrogen and carbon, which makes it an excellent mulch. Avoid dyed mulch because, not because of the dye itself, but the wood that dyed mulch is made from is often contaminated with creosote and CCA, which are harmful to the health of plants. And here is an illustration of why volcano mulching is a bad idea. As that mulch decomposes, the roots that are encouraged to grow at where they shouldn't are now exposed. Here's a properly mulched tree at the bottom. So don't overuse mulch. For one thing, weeds can often still grow through it, and make it temporary. The idea here is that eventually your plants are so vigorous and is no room, no opportunity for weeds to grow or for seeds to fall and have a chance of surviving. This is a rain garden, incidentally. You can see the pebbles leading from the garden, and any excess water will pass through there. Consider ground covers as a substitute for lawns and providing a living mulch in select areas of your property. All those functions of mulch are true for ground covers as well: preventing weeds, retaining moisture, keeping the soil cool, and also holding the soil in place on slopes. I mentioned bearberry is my favorite, #1. It does require sun, but it's a beautiful evergreen ground cover. Thyme is excellent. If you're a beekeeper, you might be aware that that bees visiting thyme and collecting the nectar of thyme are actually bringing medicine back to, as well as food back to the hive, that will help keep those hives healthy and protect them against diseases and parasites. 3-leaved cinquefoil is a beautiful ground cover, as is golden star. Wild ginger in the shade, excellent ground cover. Bishop's hat, really intriguing leaves there. And these are all native plants. I actually prefer the appearance of Allegheny or native Pachysandra to the Japanese Pachysandra that we see so often. Barren strawberry and wild strawberry even can be a ground cover. Now let's turn our attention to those ever popular hummingbirds. The ruby-throated hummingbird is the only one that we're going to find most likely, except on some rare occasions, here in New England. And we don't need to be concerned about the populations of ruby-throats at this time. They've doubled their population since 1970. But if you do want to attract them, moving water is one thing that they love. They also appreciate snags for perches, as do other birds. Leave dead trees, because as woodpeckers poke their holes, the sap attracts insects, and then the hummingbird can come and feed on those insects as well as the sap. And hummingbirds need webs for their nests. When they create their nests, they use the silk from spider webs, and incredibly, their nest will expand to twice the size of that nest, because as the chicks grow, the web, the spider silk, is elastic, and it allows the nest to grow as the chicks grow. Also, don't disturb the nests, because you might attract predators to it. But it is okay to rescue a hummingbird chick, and that's true for other birds as well. If you see a chick on the ground and know where the nest is, you can put that chick back where it belongs, and the mother will not reject it. Hummingbird feeders, it's a good idea to have this model in particular because it's easy to clean. And here's the recipe: 1 cup water to 1/4 cup sugar. You heat to dissolve, refrigerate, use it within 1 week. Replace the food every few days, clean every 3 days. And this is how you clean. Flush the feeder with hot tap. Use a bottle brush to scrub the sides. Do not use soap. Soap residue is harmful. Black mold can be a problem. In that case, you would want 1/4 cup bleach to 1 gallon of water and soak it for 1 hour. And be vigilant, because in the warm weather, the nectar will become cloudy, and if it does, it has spoiled and needs to be replaced. And this can happen even in just 1 day. So I hope I'm impressing on you how important it is to be vigilant if you have a hummingbird feeder or more. Hummingbirds love insects. So any natural environment that provides a lot of insects will welcome hummingbird populations. They also would prefer real flowers for their nectar because it has just the right balance of the different kinds of sugars, and it also has trace amounts of minerals, proteins, and amino acids, which are important for their diet. Trumpet creeper is a very robust growing vine. I would advise that you not plant it near your foundation, but otherwise, if you can find a good place for it, the hummingbirds will love those flowers. They also love trumpet honeysuckle and cardinal flower. Hummingbirds are attracted to that brilliant red. They like the color red. And they also will feed on the nectar of wild columbine in the spring when they are hungry from their long migration. That's when the wild columbine is blooming. They also feed on pink and white turtlehead blooming late in the and butterfly weed. So you notice that they feed on flowers that are not red, and once they're attracted to your property, they will sample everything, and if they like what they taste, they'll come back for more. Obedient plant, blazing star, swamp milkweed, foxglove beard tongue, purple coneflower, and phlox. Bats are also effective predators. The little brown bat population has plunged by 90% due to white nose syndrome, which is a fungus infection. And there's also less insects for them to eat. So that is bound to be a significant factor as well. So we can build bat houses to welcome them. Mass.gov is a good resource for information about bat houses, and also for information about bats in general and how to handle them and how not to. You need to evict bats only in the spring or fall. You're not allowed to evict them in the summer when they are feeding their pups. Leave dead trees standing for habitat. Don't use pesticides. Keep your cats indoors. A single cat can decimate an entire colony of bats if your cat finds it. Minimize artificial lighting. They can disturb and confuse bats at night. Also at night, minimize loud noises. So let's talk now about butterflies and moths. They are pollinators, one of the beneficial organisms, and the butterflies and moths are distinguished by the kinds of antennae they have. Moth antennae look like kind of feathers, and butterfly antennae are simple and club-tipped. Also, usually butterflies are more colorful, but there are exceptions. And usually butterflies are active in the day, but moths active at night, but there are also exceptions to that rule. Butterflies make chrysalises, moths spin cocoons. Butterfly populations are in trouble. Populations declining at an annual rate of 2%, which means a 33% population reduction over the past 20 years. For these reasons, habitat loss, pollution, parasites and pathogens, invasive species, and climate change are all contributing to insect populations in general. Here we have a few examples of moths and the host plants that they need. Moths with large wingspans have particularly been declining in numbers even more rapidly than other butterflies and moths. So this is a list of host plants to feed the caterpillar, the Polyphemus moth. Here is a list of plants that will sustain Luna moth caterpillars. So it's a wide variety of trees. And in this case, 2 vines are the food, the leaves of those vines are the food for the 8-spotted forester moth. caterpillar. And Cecropia moth caterpillars can help themselves to the leaves of any of these trees. And now let's turn our attention to butterfly gardening. You want to select an area that has plenty of sun, at least 6 hours a day. You want to have a water source nearby, shelter from the wind, host plants, of course, for those caterpillars so that they can become butterflies, and nectar producing plants that will support the adults. Organic landscaping practices are always crucial. Butterfly boxes, don't bother. All the research has shown that, and in fact, there is not a single recorded incident of butterflies using these boxes, either for shelter or to overwinter. Butterflies just don't overwinter as adults anyway. They're usually overwintering as almost always as eggs or larvae. But butterflies certainly do use mud. It's the males that that will use their proboscis to sip the moisture that has the minerals they need to create the pheromones, which is a chemical that attracts the females to them. And also when they mate, it will enrich and nourish the eggs that the female lays. So if you provide mud, butterflies might come. And you can provide mud in a bird bath or in a shallow dish that's recessed. A saucer, a flower pot saucer, for example, that's recessed in the ground will stay moist longer than something that's above the ground. And if you use gravel or sand, preferably sand from the beach, because that will have the salts that butterflies need. So if not, add salt or compost, which has those nutrients, and keep them moist. And not too much water, of course, because the give butterflies fruit, and they don't seem to mind if it's rotting. So if you have fruit that's gone bad, see what butterflies might come to it. And of course, give them leaves and be tolerant of them. Now, in terms of the adult butterflies, when they're looking or the females, when they're looking for places to lay their eggs, they know somehow which are the correct plants. Actually, I believe it's their legs. When they land on the plant, their legs can taste, if you will, the leaf to find out if it's the correct species. And goldenrod is #1 in terms of popularity with butterfly and moth females for egg laying, because it is a host species for 125 different caterpillars. Second place is strawberry at 81. Sunflower is third place at 58. And bird's foot trefoil at 32. I do want to comment about goldenrod. It's a very valuable pollinator plant as well as a host plant. But I would advise that you not allow Canadian goldenrod to get a foothold in your garden or in your landscape, because it's way too aggressive. It'll crowd everything else out, and all you'll have is goldenrod. And that's not the idea. We want diversity in our plantings. Here's another list going down, in order: Joe Pyeweed, violet, lupin, geranium, and you can glance down the list. These are also important host plants for butterflies and moths. But now let's consider the trees. As I mentioned, oak trees are wonderful for caterpillar food and therefore for attracting birds. But also a lot of those caterpillars will be missed and then have the chance to grow up to be butterflies and moths. And oak is #1 at 473 different species of butterflies and moths. Willows in second place at 399, birch at 393. So you can appreciate that trees and shrubs are actually much more popular than the herbaceous perennials that we saw, with goldenrod taking first place at 125. So it's very important to have these native trees in our landscape for that reason. And I mentioned Doug Tallamy is the authority on that fact. So nwf.org is a resource for these trees and shrubs that are host plants. Consider the spicebush swallowtail. The caterpillar can only eat spicebush or sassafras leaves. And the black swallowtail caterpillar can dine on any of the plants in the carrot family, which includes dill, parsley, Queen Anne's lace, and fennel. Baltimore checker spot caterpillars can eat turtlehead leaves and the common weed plantain, either broadleafed or narrow-leaved plantain. Spring azure butterflies, New Jersey tea, viburnums, meadowsweet, and dogwoods. And violet leaves are on the menu for the caterpillar of the great spangled fritillary, which is declining in Massachusetts in numbers. And that's a sensational photo there of the adult emerging from its chrysalis. Monarch butterflies are the one butterfly that all of us have heard about and are familiar with. And it certainly is a charismatic and fascinating animal. Its long migration is quite impressive. Monarch butterflies are also declining in population. Now, common milkweed is a host plant for monarch butterflies. It's the most common milkweed species, as the name implies, that to be found in the wild. However, I don't recommend it for your landscape unless you have a place where you don't mind it spreading, because like Canadian goldenrod that I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much a bully in the landscape. It'll keep going and going, and it'll be very difficult to get rid of it once you've established it. So it's a wonderful plant to host monarchs, but in addition to common milkweed, we have other choices. Swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, and poke milkweed are all milkweed species that caterpillars of the monarch, that the monarch mother can lay her eggs on and be assured that the caterpillar will be able to eat them. So consider that all of these milkweed species attract, when they're in flower, attract a wide variety of insects, not just the monarch. And there we have the butterfly weed. Butterfly weed is a good one to plant in if you have a dry or sandy place. It can handle that. Swamp milkweed, as the name implies, can handle wetter positions, but in your average situation, you could have both swamp milkweed and butterfly weed. They can live, and this poke milkweed can handle shade. Okay. Notice the plant atlas that I have featured down at the bottom here, the Biota of North America program, bonap.net, will show you where plants are native in which counties or which areas of the state that these plants are actually found growing in the wild. Monarch populations, as I mentioned, have declined dramatically over the years. And it all has to do, a lot of it has to do with herbicide resistant crops that farmers are growing. They spray the glyphosate pesticide, which kills the monarchs, kills the milkweed plants that the monarchs are dependent on. Pesticide use, climate change, logging, and development are also concerns. So you can establish your own monarch way station and put up a sign to proudly demonstrate that you're doing that. You can go to monarchwatch.org to learn about how you need to qualify. Of course, you'll be deciding yourself whether you qualify, but they'll help you understand what's necessary. Here's an example of a garden. Notice how there are patches there of different kinds of flowers. They're not randomly spread all over the garden. And this is appreciated by butterflies. They don't have to travel so far when they're focusing on a particular flower to find the next flower to pollinate. And this list of plants that they recommend for a typical garden can be found at edibleterrace.com, how to design a butterfly garden. You could have a raised bed pollinator garden, or you could have a more typical expansive garden that you see here. Or if you have limited space, why not consider container gardening? Every little bit helps. Here's a creative use for what's called the health strip, the strip right along the road, between the road and the sidewalk. For example, if there is a sidewalk, it's often a tough place for plants to grow. It's often compacted, maybe salty from the plows going past, and maybe dogs either urinating or leaving the droppings. So there are a number of things that you might need to do to amend the soil just for starters. But if you have get something established like this, it's wonderful. It's not difficult to manage in the long run, and it's certainly an important habitat and could be inspiring and just delightful to passersby. Consider a wildflower meadow if you have a large area of unused property. at least 400 square feet would be, I'd say, the bare minimum amount required for a meadow. It's a bit of a project, and you might want to contract it out, all of it or in part, to a professional landscaper. The first step is to eradicate all vegetation in the area that you have planned to become a wildflower meadow. And that means not only killing the existing plants that you see, but the plants that will then come up from the seed bank or arrive and be dropped in as seeds. So that will take a full year, either smothering the area or there are other approaches that you can take. If you visit extension.unh.edu, you can learn about what those procedures are, but you can see what a delightful habitat this is. Delight to the eye. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and who would not love to see this? Although I suggest that you don't have a meadow going right up to or too near your house, because it can look somewhat scraggly to some eyes in the middle of winter, for example. Have a little bit of a distance from the house and have a more managed landscape closer. According to North American Butterfly Association, NABA.org, these are the top 15 butterfly plants. Number 1 on their list is the butterfly bush. I understand why it's so appealing, because, well, butterflies find it irresistible. However, this is a non-native plant. And so while it's easy to care for and will certainly bring the butterflies in, it will not feed any larvae or caterpillars of moths and butterflies because it's a non-native. And there's an additional problem. It might become invasive here in Massachusetts. It already is invasive in some places. So with global warming, I'm sure NABA will take this off the list. I would prefer myself to use New Jersey tea, a beautiful shrub that is a magnet for butterflies. So is sweet pepperbush. And they all have their different areas where they can survive. That a compass plant is a very tall, interesting plant, because the leaves, as you can see in the lower right photo, will hold water. They clasp the stem. Birds and bees can even drink the water there after a rain. Blazing star, beautiful wildflower. Thistle. Thistles can be somewhat invasive too, by the way. They can get out of control, but hummingbirds love them. Asters of all different kinds in the fall, an important flower. Purple coneflower, irresistible to so many different kinds of pollinators. Scabiosa. So pieweed, it can handle fairly wet places as well as your normal situation. Boneset, another plant that fits that description. Bee balm of different kinds, different species of Monarda. And for annuals, we have zinnia, Mexican sunflower, and marigolds on the list. Now let's look at bees, the prime pollinators, because well, they, as we'll soon see, they're uniquely qualified. Honeybee is the one that most of us are familiar with, and we'll see the most often for sure. It's a non-native bee. Colonists brought it over 4 centuries ago from Europe, and it's been here ever since. However, it's much outnumbered by the some 400 species of native bees that were here well before Columbus, and continue. Many of them continue to be successful, although as is the case with all insects, there many populations are either gone or are threatened. Native bees come in different shapes and sizes, as you can see, but one thing they all have in common, the native and non-native bees, is that they are fuzzy, and for that reason their bodies pick up more pollen than wasps, and they are more effective pollinators than wasps, which also like nectar. You'll also notice, perhaps, when they're flying, the legs are tucked in for bees, but wasps have their legs dangling. If someone tells you that they've been stung by a bee, by the way, chances are they've been stung by a yellow jacket, which is a wasp, not a bee, because they are the most hazardous. They're ground dwelling, and if you're walking even close to their nest, well, they'll let you know they don't appreciate it, and their bites can certainly be felt. So honeybees are important, quite important for agricultural crops, and and they do, and important to us for honey as well. But the difficulty with honeybees, especially with relying on them, is that they don't come out in cold or rainy weather, rainy conditions, and they can and they simply can't pollinate or find it quite difficult to reach the nectaries at the bases of bell-like or tubular corollas or flower petals that are fused or such as low bush blueberry and many other native plants. Another difficulty or another issue with honeybees is that they can actually be competitive and exclude some native bees and compete with them for some of these nectar resources. A feral honeybee hive looks like this. They use rosin from trees to create those combs. Neonicotinoids, perhaps you've heard about them. They are extremely toxic in the environment. I would say 50 times worse than DDT, I believe I read. The European Union has done the right thing and banned them. So bee populations have been, both native and non-native, have been drastically affected. Honeybee colonies are composed of different, both drones and workers. Only 20%, some 20% of the bees are actually out there visiting flowers. If you're thinking about being a beekeeper, please research this word bee-centric or natural beekeeping. The simple concept here, illustrated here, is that if you have a taller and narrower beehive, honeybees vastly prefer that because they are concentrated in a sphere to keep themselves and each other warm through the winter. And this means that they won't have to travel that far to find the need for food. But then another aspect about natural beekeeping is just don't over-harvest the honey because too often, well, I guess we're farming honeybees right now. We're herding them and bringing them to, providing them to farmers to pollinate their crops. But all that travel means some amount of stress on those honeybee populations, and at times they're fed sugar water instead of nectar, and so they're vulnerable to a lot of diseases, and concentrated populations will do that as well. So bumblebees and honeybees are members of this family Apidae, as well as digger bees, small carpenter bees, longhorned, large carpenter, and cuckoo bee nomada. Let's think about the bumblebee and give it the credit it's due, because it's a unique bee that can do something called buzz pollination. I'll explain that in a minute. But the hive is much smaller. It looks different from a honeybee hive and is smaller in terms of the numbers of bees. And the queen has to begin that hive as a solo enterprise in the spring. She has to lay those eggs, and she has to provide for her own needs as well as feeding the developing larvae. So it's, I'm sure you can understand how important it is for that female queen bee to get all the food that she can in the spring when she's establishing that hive. They actively collect pollen in these things called corbiculae, those saddlebags on their hind legs, as do honeybees. And here's the unique thing about them. They can do something called buzz pollination. What you're looking at is a tomato flower that does not have pollen on the outside of the stamens like some flower, or most flowers do. The pollen is inside those stamens, and there's a pore at the tip, which what the bumblebee does is attaches itself to those stamens and moves its muscles at a frequency that will vibrate the stamens and cause the pollen to be released. Only bumblebees, or there are a few other insects that can do it as well. But so you can see why, because they increase pollination, both the quantity and the size of the fruit, when growers have tomatoes in greenhouses, they provide that kind of hive for bumblebees. But bumblebees do not make honey that is harvestable by people. It's all for the bees. Bumblebees can also pollinate raspberries, cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, and cucumbers quite well. There are some wildflowers that only bumblebees are strong enough to enter, such as turtlehead and bottle gentian. And so we should leave abandoned mouse and bird nests. This is a potential habitat for bumblebees. They also might find a hole in the ground or tussocky grass or bird boxes that are left or under garden sheds. Leave it be landscaping is important for bumblebees and just about anything else. There's a bumblebee finding a mouse hole and using that, and another one using an old birdhouse that's been abandoned. You can make a bumblebee shelter with an upturned pot like this, and providing a dried moss inside for a bed for that hive. Or you can actually make a wooden bumblebee shelter. You're not guaranteed that the queen is going to find it, but if you can find an abandoned mouse nest or material like that and actually put it inside that bumblebee house, that will entice it, because I don't believe bumblebees are actually able to create the nests or create the nesting material or bring it into the box. They're looking for something that's pretty much ready-made and ready to go. You can partner with Robert Jagir, who is at UMass Dartmouth, who has offered this Beecology citizen science app. He's monitoring bumblebee populations and finding out which bumblebees, just first how many there are, and second which flowers they are pollinating. So if you take photos with your cell phone and then send that information to him, and he'll help you identify the bumblebees if you need help with that. So consider this could be I'm planning to do it myself this coming year. It should be an interesting way to learn about the bees. One way to recognize them is they have different amounts of black on their abdomen. On the left-hand column, that more than half; in the middle, about half; and less than half on the right. There are some insects out there that look like bumblebees. These are both actually flies, but that's a good way to protect themselves from predation. Animals that see them and think, I better not make a meal of that. Andrenidae are solitary ground nesters. And in fact, 70% of non-native bees, 70% of native bees, are ground nesters. Mining bees, miner bees, plasterer bee, and the yellow masked bee. Here's an example of very an incredible adaptation where the mother bee actually is able to line that cavity in the ground with something that resembles a plastic bag, and then that's why it's called the cellophane bee or polyester bee. And then depositing that yellow bee bread there with a combination of nectar and pollen, which is food for the egg, which is attached to the side of that plastic bag. The egg drops down and grows into a larva, and then as an adult can eat its way out of the plastic bag. A remarkable bee. They often find old rotting logs as habitat. Sweat bees are fairly small, brightly colored, as you can see. They're called sweat bees because they're attracted to human perspiration. They are also ground dwelling, and they're solitary generalists. They can go to a wide variety of different flowers. So to provide habitat for ground nesting bees, you want to have an area that's at least several yards across, loose, well-drained soil. Sandy soil is good. Flat areas or earthen banks in a sunny position, south-facing, would accomplish that. Soil-filled planters are even a possibility, and stay off the area so you don't disturb them. Now, Megachilidae, these mason bees, are an example of bees that are cavity nesters, not ground dwellers. So the leafcutter, cuckoo bee, cuckoo leafcutter bee, and the mason bees. Here's a blue orchard mason bee. They're so incredibly effective and efficient pollinators that 300 mason bees can do the job of 90,000 honeybees in terms of pollinating the same number of flowers on an apple tree or other tree in your orchard. Mason bees need mud, and that's why they're called mason bees, to seal off the chambers where they've created their bee bread inside that tube and then laid their egg on top of it. And then they seal off that chamber with mud and then proceed as needed until until they've reached the end of the tube. They can create several chambers within one of these tubes. In nature, they would use plant stems, and a remarkable leafcutter bee, which is able to make these cut these nice, neat circles out of the leaves, and it chooses the species that are actually antibiotic for the growing larvae. And it rolls up the leaf and delivers it to that stalk that is found to create its bee chambers. So give leafcutter bees leaves to use, and also leave rotten logs be, because that's can be a habitat for them, for their homes. Here is a case where someone has drilled holes in solid wood, and different kinds of bees have taken up residence. On the top, leafcutter bee, you'll see the leaves all nicely rolled up. The rosin bee, using rosin as partitions for the chambers, and mason bees using clay. You can have your own bee box or bee hotel. If you can buy these tubes that are pre-manufactured, or you can harvest your own and roll up these paper sleeves and insert them in the tubes so that you can use them every year and not worry about cleaning them. Here are a couple of examples of bee hotels and 6 different plants that you can use for the tubes if you want to harvest them. Lovage and allium stems, elderberry and blackberry stems, Japanese knotweed, a very, very common invasive, is useful, and hydrangea stalks. If you do use logs and drill holes like this, you're going to have to throw them away at the end of the season after the bees are done with them, and start with new logs the next season, because it's impossible to clean them of any diseases or parasites that might be there. And now I'm going to offer here in this slide in terms of attracting a lot of different kinds of native bees. Wild bergamot is the champion. It attracts native bees from 15 different genera. You'll see that number 15 in the upper left corner. No plant attracts more in our area than wild bergamot. It's one of the mint plants, which all mint plants have square stems. Black-eyed Susan is a resource for 14 different native bee genera. Boneset for 13. These 6 are in the position of 12: swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, swamp tickseed, oxeye sunflower, mountain mint, and blue vervain. Mountain mint is a fantastic pollinator plant, one of my favorites. That attracts a wide variety of wasps as well as native bees. And you can rub your skin with the leaves of mountain mint, and it's an effective mosquito repellent. At 11 different native bee genera, we have foxglove beard tongue, cup plant, New England aster, and golden alexanders, which is a good spring pollinator plant. So is foxglove beard tongue, early blooming. Wild geranium is an early blooming plant, big leaf aster in the fall, and yellow coneflower at 10. Then 9, we have 6 different species: Anacisip, purple coneflower, Jacob's ladder, Ohio spiderwort, ironweed, and culver's root in the shade. Harebell will feed 8 different native bee genera, and the flowers of wild lupin and bloodroot are good for 7 native bee genera. So there you have the list. It's time to look at invertebrate predators and their prey. Spiders will eat everything possible, and so will praying mantises. But here are some real heroes, because they're focusing on the pests that we mentioned their population needs to be monitored in the interests of gardeners and farmers who are growing food. So these are all pest insects, and here are some flowers to plant to attract the lacewing adults, because they are also pollinators. You may not be aware that ladybug larvae are effective pollinators of aphids, as well as mites and mealybugs. Here's a ladybug larva, and a large collection of plants which will attract those ladybug adults. And you can see there's quite a variety of different species of ladybugs. Fireflies are diminishing in number. We should keep our outdoor lights off, because they can disturb and distract fireflies. Low-hanging trees are good for them. Forest litter, long grasses, ponds and streams. No chemicals, no fertilizers, no pesticides. Pirate bugs are effective predators as well, and assassin bugs. And here's some plants which will attract those adults. And hoverflies or syrphid flies are good predators of aphids, and there's quite a number here of plants with flowers that will attract the pollinator, the adult pollinator of the syrphid fly. Those tiny parasite wasps, Trichogramma wasps, laying their eggs in the much larger eggs of the host species and effectively controlling their populations. Here are some flowers to welcome those little fellows. And the bracketed wasps are also pollinators, and in addition to being parasites. And these are plants that will attract them. It's quite an impressive list here of all the different pest insects that they will control. When you think about pollinators and pollinator plants, think about trees and shrubs first. It stands to reason that not only are they great in terms of host plants, which we've already observed, but they have so many flowers on them that they are a wonderful resource of pollen and nectar for pollinators. Willows in particular are perhaps my favorite pollinator plant of them all, because they are providing that both pollen and nectar in the spring, early in the spring, when it's very much needed by bees, native bees as well as the honeybee. In this case, the Chinese witch hazel, it's such a wonderful plant. I don't mind that it's non-native. It actually can bloom in January, and honeybees will come out of their hive and find it, and the shrub will be humming with honeybees. Common witch hazel actually blooms at the other end in the fall. Here's a wonderful spring source for nectar and pollen for bees, the redbud. And any of the fruit trees that you'll grow in an orchard will have blossoms, and also the native trees such as American plum and the shrub beech plum. These are natives that do quite well with a minimum of maintenance. Black cherry and chokecherry are trees that show up. They're almost weedy, and birds love them, and the pollinators will also be attracted to the flowers, as they will the flowers of the Virginia rose and the Carolina rose, beautiful ornamentals. And they're natives. And we also have met Juneberry already as a fruit for birds, also providing nectar and pollen. It's surprising to learn, perhaps, that maples and oaks, which don't have showy flowers at all, do still have resources such as pollen and nectar, well, especially pollen, I believe, for the bees to gather. Basswood has plenty of nectar and is very attractive to bees. It's a tree. The shrubs, the blueberry shrubs are very good at pollinator plants as well. Red osier dogwood, common ninebark, it's a magnet for pollinators. So are the trees, winterberry trees that we mentioned earlier. Staghorn sumac blooms. Look at that inflorescence there, just covered with honeybees. Viburnums of every description, and there are a lot of them out there. They're so wonderfully ornamental, and they're also native and quite attractive to pollinators. There are native hydrangeas as well, which are useful as pollinator plants. And the mountain laurel, spectacular shrub that can tolerate shade easily. It grows in the woods, and it's a great magnet for pollinators. I'd also like to give a nod to these spring ephemerals, and in this case, the spring beauty is only pollinated by the spring beauty minor bee, none other. Trout lily requires the trout lily bee for pollination. Snowdrops, so early in the season. Crocuses, another early spring bloomer, right? Grape hyacinth, Siberian squill. Wild bleeding heart will actually bloom all through the season, even into the fall. It's and can handle shade fine. Beautiful wild plant. Okay, so bloodroot actually bleeds red, which is why it's called that. If you pick the flower, which you hopefully won't. And the trilliums are quite attractive as well. Yellow trillium has an intriguing lemon scent in the flowers. Winter aconite is a valuable pollinator plant in early spring. So are wild daffodils, and Lenten rose and Christmas rose might bloom any time of year through the winter even. So annuals for pollinators include sunflowers, Mexican sunflower, and zinnia, some of the same flowers that are attractive to hummingbirds. Spider flowers, and the culinary herbs, basil, chives, rosemary, oregano, lavender, catmint. Now, here's Kathy Neal, a retired PhD from New Hampshire. If you go to extension.unh.edu, you'll see this list. And if you send me an email message requesting some of these resources, I can provide them. But this is an excellent resource to have, and the flowering calendar for native pollinator plants. You can see what their color is by the bar right there. You can also see when they start blooming, when they end their blooming. For example, look at Ohio spiderwort, blooms for quite a long time, when it stops and when it ends. So your goal in creating your pollinator garden is to make sure you have several plants blooming at once, and starting early and going late into the season, as long as there are pollinators out there looking for them. So Kathy Neal is a great resource. Here are 3 resources to learn about seeds and germination and growing natives from seeds. It's a economical way to grow, and also when you grow from seeds, you have a great quantity and a lot of genetic diversity. So grow them close together. They don't mind crowding like that. And then when you're ready to put them in their own individual little spaces, you're creating plugs. Plant quantity, economy, and genetic diversity. You can buy plugs in a number of nurseries as well if you have not had the opportunity to grow those plants from seed. And they're much less expensive than buying them when they're larger plants. Vegetative propagation is one way to increase the population of different plants on your property. Using clippers to get to separate a clump that has each stem has its own supply of roots, so you can get 4 or 5 or 6 where there was one before. Keep in mind though that these will all be genetically identical, so hopefully you'll have others that are not clones in your environment too, so they can cross-pollinate. Vegetative propagation is also possible with simple layering and mound stool layering, which are illustrated here. Simply bending the stem down and covering it with soil will induce it to sprout roots, and then you can cut the plant right there and move it where you want it to grow. Cuttings of the plants put in pots will also work for many species, and you can go to ngofmc.org to learn more about dividing perennials. Now I'm offering this list of nurseries. Again, I can send this to you if you request it via email. Consider these establishments not only sources of plugs and larger plants, or in some cases both perennials and woody species, but they're also sources of a lot of information. If you have questions, if you need to know how to grow different things or what's going to be successful on your property, many of these establishments have a lot of experience to draw on. And speaking of people who have experience, there's nothing like master gardeners. Here's their Tower Hill Hortline, their phone number, and their email address. They invite you to send a clear plant photo for ID or a diagnosis if you have a plant that's having some issues and you want to understand what's going on, or even if you don't know what it is, you want to know what plant you have. And join a garden club, because there's so much you can learn. You can then share plants with each other, share information with each other, befriend gardeners in general in your neighborhood, and make wonderful things happen. A lot of sharing can go on in this case, and even work parties. You can help each other out with different projects and enjoy each other's company and learn the process. Please invite children to be stewards of nature. We're counting on them to, if we foster a love and respect for nature, they will protect the planet. It's children and people of all ages who feel close to nature, who are the ones who will be the most energetic advocates. So all decisions must maximize the welfare of the unborn unto the seventh generation. We're talking about our grandchildren's 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 children, whose needs are just as important as our own. And that goes, of course, for all of life that cannot speak for itself, the plants and animals. So there is no limit to what we can do together. Start where you are, and thank you for doing your part. There's my email address at the bottom, info@johnreed.net.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to mention that everybody here should have my email address, and I can get you some information if you're interested.
Are there any questions or comments?
John, there's a couple in the chat. Can you see the chat?
Can you read them, please, Gary?
Sure. So there's one asking about why you suggested bleach, because it's bad for the environment. Instead, use vinegar for the prevention of mold on bird feeders.
I don't recall where I saw that as a source, but I saw it online. I can tell you that.
Okay. And then somebody else asked about planting thyme as a ground cover. She has experience with holy thyme. Are there other varieties that work as well?
Oh, there are so many varieties of thyme. In fact, if you had enough different species of thyme, you would be able to have thyme blooming for the entire, for the entire flowering season, spring, summer, and fall. So, it's a wonderful plant for that reason. It can meet the needs of so many pollinators.
And she said she's looking for something specifically as far as the thyme to grow in between stepping stones or bricks.
Oh,
Or moss recommendations also.
yeah, and I'm going to pass that off to either the Hortline or perhaps one of the nurseries that sell thyme, because they would be the ones with the expertise to be able to answer a question like that.
Okay, thank you. It looks like that's the questions we have tonight. We're just almost at 8 o'clock, so we do need to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you very much, John, for all of your information tonight. I think we've learned a lot. And feel free, everybody has my email address. Email me if you have any questions you need me to pass on to John, or if you want his some of the things that he mentioned that he could share.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.